The glare of the fluorescent lights in the grocery aisle blurred as Brenda, with a casual flick of her wrist, dropped the expensive coffee into our cart. "He's a damn good lover," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine, then shifting to a stranger's. My breath hitched, the price tag of the coffee suddenly insignificant next to the cost of her words. The stranger, an elderly woman, gave us a look of pity and disgust, and I knew without doubt the end was here. Brenda just smirked. "Don't look so surprised, Dale. You saw this coming." The stale air of Mr. Miller's law office still clung to my clothes as I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. "Cheaper to support her," the lawyer had advised, his voice flat, devoid of judgment. The words were a heavy stone in my gut. I thought of the mortgage, the girls' school, the endless stream of bills. It felt like a trap, carefully constructed over years, now sprung shut. Brenda caught up to me at the crosswalk, her stride light, a casual indifference in her posture that grated on my nerves. "So about Wes," she began, as if discussing the weather. "He's been a damn good lover these past 8 months." She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the display in the hardware store window. I don't think I could choose, honestly. My jaw tightened. 8 months. That was before we even had the serious talk about her discontent, before I tried to fix whatever I'd broken. She continued, oblivious or simply defiant. "So here's what I was thinking. You get the lion's share of my time, obviously. You're the father, the husband. But Wes has needs too." She turned to me then, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "I'll work out a schedule. It'll be fair." A schedule. For me. For him. Like I was a chore to be fitted into her week. My hands clenched at my sides. I pushed past her, not saying a word, the lawyer's dry advice about alimony and child custody hammering in my head. "Dale, wait!" she squealed, a sound that usually cut through me. But this time it just sounded shrill. She cut herself off abruptly, her voice dying as her eyes landed on Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, who was wrestling a bag of groceries into her trunk across the street. Mrs. Henderson's gaze, usually kind, hardened into a disapproving stare, and Brenda's carefully constructed composure faltered for a second. 2 days later, the silence in the house was a physical weight. I'd walked away, but where was there to go? My truck was still loaded with the clothes I'd packed in a fit of rage that had quickly dissolved into a dull, throbbing ache. The porch light was on when I pulled into the driveway. Brenda was on the couch watching some reality show, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn on her lap. She looked up, a knowing smirk on her face. It was the kind of smirk that told me she'd expected this, that she'd known I would come back. "Daddy," Emily, 13, was down the stairs first, followed closely by 11-year-old Grace. Their faces lit up, a genuine joy that momentarily washed away the ugliness. I hugged them, their small arms a desperate anchor in a churning sea. Their laughter, their stories about school, about a new kitten at a friend's house, were a brief, sweet distraction. Later, after I'd read them stories and tucked them in, after their rooms were quiet, Brenda appeared at the spare bedroom door. "Thought you could use this," she said, holding out a sweating bottle of beer. I took it, the cold glass a shock against my skin, and placed it on the small bedside table without opening it. I wouldn't drink anything she offered, not tonight. She walked in, closing the door behind her, leaning against it with that same smug look. "I knew you'd come to your senses," she declared, crossing her arms over her chest. "We'll live our lives the same, you, me, the girls. It'll all work out." Her voice was laced with a certainty that made my stomach churn. I looked at her, then at the unopened beer. "No," I said, my voice flat, almost devoid of emotion. "It won't be the same." Her smirk wavered. "I'm staying, yes, but only until Emily turns 18. That's 4 years, 8 months." I paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. "Then I'm gone." Her face, usually so composed, began to crack. "And I'm moving into this room. Tonight. The days of me getting your sloppy seconds will be in my past." I met her eyes, letting her see the cold, hard truth of my resolve. "You will no longer share my bed." She recoiled as if slapped. "What about the bills?" "My needs?" she sputtered, her voice rising. "You'll get it, Bob," I stated, calm despite the fury building in her eyes. Or Wes can support you. My money, I continued, pointing a finger at her, is for Emily and Grace, not for your shopping sprees, not for your lover, and not for you. Brenda's face went from pale to a livid crimson. A guttural sound escaped her throat, and she spun around, running to our old bedroom and slamming the door, the sound rattling the pictures on the wall. A moment later, I heard the click of the lock. "You'll regret this, Dale," she screamed through the door. "I'll tell everyone, Patterson and Maine. They'll know what a miserable bastard you are." I waited a moment, then walked to the door and tried the handle. Locked. I pushed hard, my shoulder hitting the wood. The old frame groaned, and the lock gave way with a splintering crack. She was on the phone, her voice hushed, frantic. "He knows, Wes. He knows everything." I snatched the phone from her hand. "Wes," I said into the receiver, my voice steady. "It's Dale." There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "I have your number now. Don't worry about me hurting you. That's not my style." I glanced at Brenda, whose face was a mask of terror and rage. "But I can tell you this for free. She'll cheat on her lover at the first opportunity. You'll be next." I hung up without waiting for a reply. Just then, Emily and Grace appeared in the hallway, their eyes wide, rubbing sleep from their faces. "Daddy, what was that noise?" Emily asked, pointing at the cracked door frame. "Nothing, sweethearts," I said, my voice softer now. "Just an old house settling. Go back to bed. Everything's fine." I watched them retreat, then turned back to Brenda. "Give me the phone," she hissed, her eyes burning. I pocketed it. "I'm going to check your accounts, every one of them." She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Good luck with that, cowboy. My security's like Fort Knox." I simply grinned, a cold, hard smile that didn't reach my eyes. She didn't know about the keystroke logger I'd installed on her laptop weeks ago, before any of this came out. The quiet hum of the old desktop computer in my makeshift office in the basement was the only sound in the house after Brenda finally locked herself in the master bedroom. I retrieved the small USB drive from my pocket, the one holding the keystroke logger I'd installed weeks ago, more as a precaution than with any real expectation. It was a cold, methodical act, plugging it in, watching the file transfer. Then I began to print, page after page, the LaserJet Word, spitting out Brenda's emails, her search history, her online purchases. It laid bare everything. 8 months of clandestine communication. Search terms like discreet motels and dating married men. The details of an Amazon purchase for a specific cologne Wes apparently favored, sent to a P.O. box. And then the discovery. Wes worked for the county, a permit checker. They'd met when Brenda applied for the permit for my workshop, my man cave, the one I'd built myself. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. She'd used my own project, my space, as the conduit for her betrayal. I collected all the printouts, a thick stack of paper detailing the slow unraveling of my marriage. I took photos of key conversations, videos of specific interactions. Everything was uploaded to a secure folder on my office computer, a digital vault for the inevitable. With the task complete, I turned off the light. I climbed the stairs, the house silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, a heavy, dreamless sleep. The next morning, the house was filled with the smell of sizzling bacon and coffee. Emily and Grace, oblivious to the storm that had broken the night before, chattered at the kitchen table. Emily spoke about a new boy in her class, Grace about a song she heard on the radio. Their voices, bright and innocent, were a stark contrast to the grim reality I was now facing. "Girls," I said, placing plates of scrambled eggs and bacon in front of them, "I have some new responsibilities at work. Lots of travel coming up." It wasn't a lie, not exactly. The travel was certainly coming, just not for work. "So, Mom will be your main chauffeur from now on. School, friends, practice. She'll be taking you everywhere." Brenda, who had just walked in, still in her robe, glared at me from across the kitchen. The faint bags under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept as soundly as I had. She opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. "Oh, darling," she began, trying to keep her voice light. "The girls can just ride with Sarah or Liz, couldn't you girls?" She turned to them, a forced smile on her face. Emily wrinkled her nose. No way, Mom. Sarah's dad, Mr. Peterson, is super creepy, and Liz's mom, Mrs. Johnson, always smells like old cigarettes. Grace nodded in agreement. Yeah, and they always ask weird questions, like what we eat for dinner and stuff. See, I said, turning back to Brenda, my voice calm, almost conversational. Looks like you're on the hook for daily transport. Plenty of time for it, too, now that your mental functions aren't being centered in your ass during the day. I let the words hang there, the thinly veiled jab about her daytime dalliances. Her face flushed, a mottled red against her pale skin. Before I left for work, I delivered the final blow for the morning. Just so we're clear, Brenda, I said, pausing at the front door, the whole house is hooked up now. Sound and video, every room. I looked directly into her eyes, making sure she understood. You get Wes in here and it'll all be online within an hour. I mean it. The keys jingled in my hand as I walked out, leaving her standing frozen in the hallway. Later that day, eating a lonely lunch at my desk, I logged into the surveillance system. The live feed showed Brenda, frantic, scurrying from room to room, her hands patting walls, peering behind lamps. Her frustration was palpable, even through the grainy video. She was ripping cushions off the couch, pulling books from shelves. She looked like a cornered rat, and a grim satisfaction settled in my chest. Then she grabbed her phone, her movements agitated. I turned up the audio feed. He knows, Wes. He knows everything. Her voice was shrill, barely controlled. He canceled my cards, Wes, all of them, and the bank balance is practically zero. There was a muffled reply from Wes. No, I told him you were Plan B. He just went crazy, she insisted. Wes's voice, though low, carried a tone of distinct discomfort. Look, Brenda, maybe we should just wait. I don't want to be on the hook for this, you know? Brenda grew more agitated. On the hook? What about my afternoon? He ruined it. We were supposed to meet. We can't leave our spouses now, Brenda, Wes argued, his voice clearer this time. We'd be broke, absolutely broke. Let's just do lunch, a quiet lunch, not, the motel. A quiet lunch? I can't even pay for a motel room now? She practically screamed into the phone. And I'm not meeting you at your office. Are you crazy? I continued to watch, continued to listen, a cold analysis of their dynamic unfolding before me. Brenda's desperation was clear, a frantic scramble to maintain some semblance of her old life, her old comforts. Wes, on the other hand, was cautious, practical to a fault, clearly more interested in protecting his own skin and finances than in rushing to Brenda's rescue. The extent of her duplicity, her careless disregard for consequences, solidified in my mind. My initial strategy, born of rage, began to sharpen, focusing now on precise financial and reputational damage. The basement office became my sanctuary, a place where the cold logic of numbers and facts replaced the chaos upstairs. I started documenting everything. Every transaction Brenda made, every conversation she had over the phone, every email. It was a meticulous, soul-crushing task, laying bare the financial hemorrhaging that had been slowly draining our shared life. I printed bank statements, highlighted credit card charges for restaurants I'd never visited, for gas receipts from towns far from my usual routes. It was clear Brenda had been using our joint funds, not just for herself, but for Wes, buying him gifts, paying for their outings. The sheer audacity of it, under my nose, made my hands tremble. My next step was clinical. All incoming funds, my paycheck, the rental income from the duplex we owned, were systematically rerouted. A new account, solely in my name, became the repository. Brenda's access to our shared accounts was slowly, imperceptibly choked off. The funds would dwindle, then disappear. It was a financial guillotine, slow-acting, but inevitable. Brenda's frustration grew with each declined card, each empty wallet. She'd come to me, a forced calm in her voice, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. My card was declined at the grocery store today, Dale, and then at the gas station. What's going on? I'd look at her, a carefully crafted blankness on my face. Is that right? I haven't checked the balance in a while. Been so busy with work. You know how it is. You just need to be more careful. Brenda, things are tight. My feigned ignorance was a thin shield, but it was enough to keep her guessing, to sow the seeds of doubt. Emily and Grace, sharp-eyed as always, began to notice the shift. "Mom and Dad, why don't you eat dinner together anymore?" Emily asked one evening, her brow furrowed. Grace added, "Yeah, and you don't talk much. Are you mad at each other?" I'd reassure them, "Of course not, sweetie. Dad just has a lot on his mind with work, and Mom's been busy with, well, with a lot of things." I'd make sure their routines remained solid. Breakfasts were still elaborate. Bedtime stories were still told. Weekends still included trips to the park or movie nights. I shielded them from the encroaching darkness. Their innocence, a fragile thing I was determined to protect for as long as possible. Brenda, cornered by the shrinking funds, became desperate. I'd listen through the surveillance as she called her friends, her voice laced with manufactured distress. "Dale's just been so tight-fisted lately, Karen. I don't know what's gotten into him. Could you float me 50 until payday?" Her stories varied, but the plea for money was constant. Each call was another nail in the coffin of her reputation, even among her own circle. Wes, listening to Brenda's growing financial woes, began to distance himself. I could hear it in his tone, a subtle shift from infatuation to exasperation. "Brenda, I don't know. This sounds like a mess. Maybe we should just cool things off for a bit." The implied threats I'd made, the reality of Brenda's crumbling financial life, were getting to him. He wasn't a hero, just a man looking for a good time, and this was becoming far too complicated. Brenda's calls to him grew more frantic, more pleading. "Wes, you promised me a future. You said you'd leave her. We were going to be together." Her voice was high-pitched, laced with desperation. I captured a particularly damning conversation where she tried to manipulate him, painting a picture of a more exciting, passionate life with her, contrasting it with the dull monotony of his marriage. "Think of what we could have, Wes. A real life, not like her." Around that time, Wes's wife received an anonymous tip, a carefully worded email detailing specific dates, times, and locations, all gleaned from Brenda's keystrokes and my surveillance. It wasn't a direct confrontation, just enough information to plant the seeds of doubt, to cause strife in their home. I imagined the scene, the accusations, the denials. It was another domino falling. Days later, I walked into the kitchen as Brenda was making herself a cup of instant coffee, her face drawn. "You know," I said as casually as I could, "people are talking, Brenda, about your lunch dates and your shopping sprees. Small town, you know. Nothing stays secret for long." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with paranoia. "What are you talking about?" I just shrugged, pouring myself a glass of water. "Just what I hear. It's a shame, really." Soon after, I heard her on the phone with Wes, her voice trembling with accusation. "Did you tell someone, Wes? Did you tell your wife? Or your friends? People are talking about us." The wedge was driven deeper, the trust between them eroding. Observing all this through the screens in my basement, I felt a grim satisfaction. It was working. The plan was unfolding. But beneath that satisfaction was a heavy, persistent ache. I was dismantling my family, brick by painstaking brick. I knew the girls would eventually be caught in the crossfire, and that knowledge was a cold hand squeezing my heart. But there was no turning back now. I began to gather the final pieces of evidence, preparing for the next phase, the more public exposure. The dossier sat heavy on my desk, a physical manifestation of Brenda's betrayal. It contained everything. Printouts of her romantic emails, receipts for gifts bought for Wes, stills from the surveillance video showing clandestine meetings outside coffee shops, audio recordings of her desperate calls. Each piece was a shard of our life, meticulously documented. Ready for deployment, I started small, with anonymous emails. Carefully crafted, they didn't accuse directly, but hinted at a pattern of behavior, a deviation from the expected. "It's a shame how some people conduct themselves in plain sight," one might read, sent to the PTA president. Another to a prominent church member. "One must wonder about commitment these days, especially when families are involved." These were seeds, planted in fertile ground, designed to sprout gossip, to make people look closer at Brenda. Soon enough, the signs started. At the grocery store, Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had known Brenda since she was a girl, averted her gaze as we passed. Friends Brenda had known for years suddenly became too busy for lunch. The polite waves from neighbors became stiff nods, if they happened at all. The air around Brenda grew colder, thick with unspoken judgment. I made sure Emily and Grace were always with me. Weekends were filled with father-daughter trips to the park, library visits, ice cream runs. We were a unit, visibly together, a stark contrast to Brenda's increasingly isolated outings, which were now reduced to frantic attempts to buy things with non-existent funds. Our public presence, my calm demeanor, spoke volumes without me having to utter a word. Wes's world, meanwhile, was also crumbling. The anonymous tip I'd sent his wife had done its job. Their fights had escalated, growing louder, more public. I saw them once at the county fair, arguing near the Ferris wheel, his wife's face tear-streaked, Wes looking agitated, running a hand through his hair. Their marital crisis was no longer a private affair. He grew more distant from Brenda, his calls terse, resentful. "This is all your fault, Brenda," I heard him yell during one recorded phone call. "My wife's talking to a lawyer. You've ruined everything." The infatuation had curdled into blame, and I felt a grim satisfaction in the basement, listening. The opportunity to expose Brenda's financial mismanagement arose during the annual community fundraiser for the local animal shelter. Brenda, ever the social butterfly, had offered to help with ticket sales. I subtly mentioned to the organizer, a notoriously nosy woman named Carol, that Brenda might be having some trouble with her cards lately, suggesting Carol handle the cash. When Brenda's personal card was declined for a small purchase at the refreshment stand later that evening, Carol's hushed comments, amplified by a few strategic whispers, spread like wildfire. The implication of financial irresponsibility hung heavy in the air. Furious, Brenda tried to regain control. She cornered me near the cakewalk, her eyes blazing. "You're doing this, aren't you, Dale? You're trying to ruin me." She lowered her voice, a desperate hiss. "You're abusive, a controlling bastard. Everyone knows it." I simply looked at her, my expression calm. "Brenda, calm down. Everyone's looking." I glanced around, exaggerating my concern. My composure, my lack of reaction, made her accusations sound hollow, unhinged. People who had witnessed her outburst exchanged glances, their pity for me growing, their judgment of her solidifying. The girls were now fully aware. "Why is Mom always so mad, Dad?" Grace asked one night, tucked into bed. Emily added, "And she's never home for dinner anymore. Is she okay?" I sat on Emily's bed, smoothing her hair. "Sometimes, sweetie," I began, choosing my words carefully, "adults make choices that are, not good. Choices that hurt other people. And those choices have consequences." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. It was enough for now. Desperate for cash, Brenda tried to sell some of her expensive clothes at a consignment shop in the next town over. I saw her through the surveillance footage, haggling over prices, her face a mask of embarrassment, as the shop owner picked apart her designer wardrobe, offering pennies on the dollar. Her attempts to reclaim her lavish lifestyle were met with meager returns and public humiliation. At work, I used my connections. A casual conversation with a colleague on the county zoning board led to a temporary relocation for Wes's department to a less desirable, far-flung office. It wasn't a dismissal, but a subtle demotion, a logistical nightmare that would impact his daily life and, by extension, his career prospects. One morning, Brenda came storming into the basement office, a stack of mail in her hand, her face white with rage. "My name's been removed from the joint credit cards. And the home equity loan. What have you done, Dale?" Her financial independence was completely eroded, her name systematically purged from every shared account. She called Wes, a desperate plea for financial help, her voice raw. I listened as he flatly refused, citing his own troubles, his own looming divorce. "I can't, Brenda. I just can't. I'm barely keeping my head above water myself." I watched Brenda's isolation grow, a palpable thing in the house. The victory felt hollow, though, tinged with the sadness of what once was. The family I had known was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating chess game. The summons arrived in the mail, crisp and official. Brenda, cornered and desperate, had finally played her hand. She had contacted Mr. Miller, my own lawyer, accusing me of financial abuse, harassment, and demanding a restraining order. It was a predictable move, a last-ditch effort to reclaim some control. Mr. Miller, a man of quiet professionalism, had been wary. He remembered my initial visit, the detailed account I'd given him weeks ago. Still, he was obligated to represent her initial inquiry. He called me, his voice carefully neutral, informing me of Brenda's intentions and setting a time for a meeting. I walked into his office carrying another thick binder. It contained the final dossier, the authenticated keystroke logs, more printouts of her personal emails detailing the affair, time-stamped photos of Wes's car at various locations connected to Brenda, and audio recordings of her manipulating Wes, her attempts to borrow money from friends, her accusations against me. I laid it all out on his polished desk, the weight of the evidence undeniable. Mr. Miller flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from professional detachment to something akin to grim understanding. He quickly advised Brenda against pursuing her claims without stronger, more credible proof. He told me she left his office in a huff, threatening to find a lawyer who actually knew how to fight. Back home, Brenda, emboldened by her anger, began her campaign to turn the girls against me. "Your father's being so tight with money, sweethearts," she'd sigh dramatically at the dinner table, where I now ate alone with Emily and Grace. "He doesn't want us to have nice things anymore." Or, "He's always working, never around. He doesn't care about you two as much as he pretends." Emily, always more sensitive, began to show the strain. Her schoolwork, usually impeccable, slipped. She became withdrawn, her vibrant energy replaced by a quiet sadness. She'd snap at Grace over small things, then retreat to her room. I'd watch her, my chest tightening with a cold ache. This was the cost. One evening after Emily had cried herself to sleep over a minor squabble with Brenda, I confronted her. She was watching TV in the living room, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table. "They don't deserve this, Brenda," I said, my voice firm, controlled, but laced with an unshakable resolve. "Whatever you think of me, leave them out of it." She just glared at me, her eyes hard and defiant. The news about Wes came through the grapevine. Then in a formal memo from the county, Wes had been restructured out of his position. Not fired outright, but offered a dead-end part-time role in a distant satellite office. It was a demotion, a public acknowledgement of the fallout from his affair, a direct consequence of the quiet groundwork I'd laid. He disappeared from the community, effectively erased from their lives. Brenda, without Wes as a financial or emotional outlet, grew increasingly erratic. I heard her through the surveillance, making desperate, tearful calls to him, then to friends, then to random numbers, pleading for connection, for money, for sympathy. She even showed up at Wes's parents' house once, causing a scene on their front lawn that ended with his father shouting at her to leave. The public embarrassment piled up, leaving her more isolated than ever. It was time to make it official. I filed for formal separation, citing irreconcilable differences and, importantly, presenting the court with evidence of Brenda's financial and emotional neglect towards the girls in the household during her affair. The paperwork felt heavy in my hand, a legal severing of what was already long dead. The court mandated joint counseling sessions for the family. Dr. Evans, a kind but sharp woman with silver hair, saw the deep fracture immediately. In her office, the veneer of normalcy we tried to maintain cracked. Emily and Grace, sensing a safe space, voiced their confusion, their pain, the fear of their parents' constant silent war. "Why are you both so sad?" Grace asked, her small voice barely a whisper. "Why can't you just be happy again?" Their words, pure and unvarnished, put pressure on both of us, a raw plea for the family they remembered. Brenda, losing public sympathy, found her social circle shrinking dramatically. Invitations stopped coming. The few friends she had left avoided her calls. She was now a pariah, the subject of hushed whispers and averted glances. It was a slow, deliberate demolition, and I couldn't help but wonder what wreckage would be left. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. I maintained my stoic demeanor, but the burden of my daughter's pain weighed heavily. The victory, the methodical destruction of Brenda's world, felt hollow, tainted by the damage to Emily and Grace. I questioned the cost of my revenge, the lingering scar it would leave on all of us. Brenda, stripped of her social standing, her financial leverage, and her affair, began to realize the true extent of her misjudgment. I saw it in her eyes sometimes, a flicker of fear, a dawning understanding of the irreversible consequences of her choices. The separation agreement proceeded, a cold legal document that finalized her financial hardship. I ensured Brenda received only what was legally mandated by the state of Illinois, no more, no less. There would be no extra generosity, no room for maneuver. Her choices had led her here, and now she would live with them. The scent of fresh paint was still faint in the air of my new apartment, a quiet two-bedroom unit on the edge of town. It wasn't the large family home, but it was mine, and it was a refuge. I'd furnished it simply, functional and clean. A comfortable couch, a solid dining table, and separate, brightly decorated rooms for Emily and Grace. It was a stable, predictable space, a stark contrast to the simmering tension of the old house. Emily and Grace quickly settled into a routine. They looked forward to their weekends with me, the quiet rhythm of our days. We cooked together, watched movies, and talked. The peace, the predictability seemed to visibly unburden them. They laughed more, their eyes brighter. Brenda, meanwhile, struggled. The family home, once a symbol of her comfortable life, became a financial drain she couldn't manage. Without my income, without my attention to the bills, the reality was stark. Mortgage payments, utility costs, property taxes, they loomed insurmountable. Wes, as predicted, had completely severed ties. His demotion or effective job loss had made him bitter, and he laid the blame squarely on Brenda. I heard it once through a recorded message he'd left on her phone. "This is your fault, Brenda. My life is ruined because of you." His voice was cold, final. Abandoned by Wes, ostracized by the community, Brenda spiraled. The calls to her diminishing circle of friends became more frequent, more desperate, laced with self-pity and thinly veiled blame. She often sounded drunk, her words slurred. I found a quiet comfort in my new routine. My business, once a secondary concern, now thrived with my renewed focus. And my daughters, their well-being, became my central purpose. I watched Brenda's deterioration through the surveillance footage, a slow-motion collapse. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a weary resignation to the path she had chosen. It was the natural conclusion to a series of selfish choices. Emily and Grace, though still longing for the intact family they once had, expressed a quiet relief at the reduced tension. "It's nice here, Dad," Emily said one evening, snuggled on the couch. "It's quiet." Grace simply nodded, leaning her head against my arm. Slowly, cautiously, I began to date. Sarah, a kind woman from a neighboring town, worked at the local library. We met for coffee, for quiet dinners, for walks in the park. It was a gentle, undemanding connection, and I kept it private, a small, hopeful flicker away from the drama. The girls didn't know, and I wasn't ready to complicate their lives further. Brenda's house, once meticulously kept, started to fall into disrepair. The lawn grew shaggy, paint peeled from the trim, and stacks of unopened mail piled up on the porch. It was a visual marker of her internal state, a physical manifestation of her decline. Even Mr. Thompson, my boss, noticed. He called me into his office one afternoon. "Dale," he said, his voice soft, "I just wanted to say I've seen what you've been through. You've handled it with remarkable strength. You're a good man." His quiet support meant more than he could know. Brenda's attempts to rekindle old friendships continued to fail. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations to her few remaining social gatherings were met with polite excuses. People had made their judgments, and the public fallout from her choices had solidified their opinions. I started thinking about my work schedule, about reducing my hours, about spending even more time with the girls. Their well-being was paramount now. The financial stability I'd built was more than enough, and time, precious and fleeting, was what they needed most. One afternoon, I was in the living room helping Grace with her homework when Brenda called. I'd put it on speaker, a habit I'd formed to record her more outlandish outbursts. Her voice, thick with tears and desperation, filled the quiet room. "Dale," she sobbed, please come back. I've made so many mistakes. I miss you. I miss us. I can change. I promise. Grace looked up, her pencil frozen over her math book. Emily appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Their eyes, wide and troubled, met mine. They listened, their small faces a mixture of pity and a dawning resentment. The desperate plea hung in the air, a raw, painful sound, and I remained firm. Just when a semblance of routine began to settle, a new problem arose. Brenda, facing the relentless tide of bills and her dwindling funds, threatened to sell the family home. The house, where Emily and Grace had grown up, where their memories were etched into every wall, was still partly mine, tied up in the ongoing separation agreement. The thought of a for sale sign planted in the front yard, the girls losing their childhood home, sent a cold spike of panic through me. I called Mr. Miller again. He listened patiently, then confirmed my fear. Dale, she has a right to her share. If she can't afford the upkeep, she can force a sale. The only way to prevent it, he explained, was to buy her out, a substantial financial undertaking on top of everything else. It meant more debt, more sacrifice. But the image of the girls' faces if they lost their home was a powerful motivator. The emotional toll on Emily and Grace was becoming undeniable. Emily, always so diligent, started acting out at school. Her teachers reported a drop in her grades, a new defiance in her attitude. She'd snap at me, storm off to her room, a raw anger simmering beneath her usual composure. Grace, quieter by nature, became withdrawn. Her drawings, once bright and full of fantastical creatures, were now muted, often depicting solitary figures under dark skies, a visual language of sadness and confusion. Dr. Evans, during our last family therapy session, looked at us, her expression grave. Emily and Grace need individual therapy, she stated, her voice gentle but firm. They are carrying a heavy burden. Both of you need to support this, unequivocally. It was a rare moment where Brenda and I had a tense discussion about the girls' well-being, our focus aligning, however briefly, on our shared concern for them. Brenda, for all her faults, still loved her daughters, and their pain seemed to penetrate her self-absorption, if only for a fleeting moment. Desperate for allies, Brenda tried to involve extended family members. She called my sister, my cousins, painting me as the cruel, unyielding spouse who had cut her off, abandoned her, and was now destroying the girls' lives. But I had prepared my family. Months ago, I had quietly, discreetly informed them of Brenda's affair, of her financial misdeeds, of the pain she had inflicted. They knew the truth, and while they felt a reluctant pity for Brenda, their loyalty remained with me. They offered quiet support, discouraging Brenda's attempts to enlist them in her cause. Even Wes, who had moved out of state, sent Brenda a cryptic text message one night. Things aren't so great here either. Don't expect any help. No solace, no regret, just a confirmation of his own new struggles, a final definitive severing of their twisted bond. Alone in my apartment one evening, staring at Grace's latest drawing, a small girl standing alone under a giant weeping willow, a wave of doubt washed over me. Had my relentless pursuit of justice, my methodical dismantling of Brenda's life, caused more harm than good for my daughters? Had I become as cold and calculating as the anger that drove me? The thought was a sharp, unwelcome pain in my chest. I called Gary, my oldest friend, the one person who knew the full, unvarnished story. He listened to my doubts, then cut straight to the point. Dale, he said, his voice steady, Brenda's choices started this cascade. You're trying to salvage what's left, to protect your girls. Don't confuse consequences with creation. His words were a necessary anchor, pulling me back from the edge of self-recrimination. Brenda's attempts to find a stable job proved futile. Her lack of recent work history, coupled with her damaged reputation in our small town, meant rejection after rejection. She took odd jobs, piecemeal work, but nothing stable enough to stem the tide of her financial decline. Then came a heartbreaking moment. Emily, sitting across from me at the kitchen table in my apartment, picked at her dinner. Dad, she said, her voice small, I hate Mom sometimes. My fork clattered against the plate. She made everything bad. She broke our family. The raw resentment in her young voice was a testament to the depth of the damage. It was a truth I had suspected, but hearing it spoken aloud by my own daughter, was a different kind of pain. I made my decision then, firm and resolute. I would proceed with securing the family home. It would mean taking on more debt, more financial strain, but it was a necessary sacrifice. It was for the girls, for their sense of roots, for a stable foundation in a world that had, for too long, felt like shifting sand. Their future, their well-being, was worth every penny, every struggle. The legal proceedings to buy out Brenda's share of the family home were a grinding, emotionally draining process. Every document, every negotiation, felt like prying a piece of my own history from unwilling hands. The financial strain was immense, but the thought of the girls losing their home kept me moving forward. Brenda contested every point, trying to extract as much money as possible. Her tactics prolonged the legal battle, turning what should have been a relatively straightforward transaction into a bitter war of attrition. Judge Reynolds, overseeing the escalating divorce, grew visibly impatient with Brenda's relentless delays and unreasonable demands. His stern pronouncements from the bench, aimed subtly at Brenda's lawyer, underscored the futility of her strategy. A pivotal moment came during the child custody hearing. Emily and Grace, speaking to a court-appointed counselor, articulated their desire for stability, for predictability. They spoke of the quiet at my apartment, the consistent routines, the feeling of safety. Their words, unfiltered and honest, painted a clear picture of their preference for my more stable environment. It was a victory, but a heartbreaking one, built on the pain of my children. Brenda, in her desperation, even tried to involve the police. Detective Carlson was called in to investigate minor harassment claims she made against me, unsubstantiated accusations of following her, of making threatening phone calls. He interviewed me, a quick, professional exchange. In the end, he found no evidence, dismissing her claims as without merit. Through it all, Brenda continued to sell personal belongings, not just her clothes, but pieces of furniture, even some of the girls' sentimental items. A porcelain doll Emily had cherished, Grace's collection of polished stones. The desperation was palpable, and it filled me with a cold anger. These were things the girls loved, things that held memories. Her disregard for their feelings was boundless. Then the temporary order arrived. Primary custody was granted to me. It was a pivotal moment, a legal acknowledgement of what was already evident. The girls would live with me, spend only supervised time with Brenda. The reality of losing both her home and her daughter finally hit Brenda. She had a breakdown, a raw, uncontrolled outpouring of grief and regret during a session with Dr. Evans. I wasn't there, but Dr. Evans relayed Brenda's admissions, the depth of her regret, the acknowledgement of her mistakes, the crushing weight of her consequences. It was too late, of course, but for the first time I felt a faint glimmer of something other than anger from her direction. Unexpectedly, Wes made an appearance in town. He found me outside the courthouse one afternoon. He looked tired, older, his confident swagger replaced by a hesitant humility. "Dale," he began, extending a hand, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." I looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, my expression cold. I simply turned and walked away, not bothering to offer even a dismissive word. There was nothing left to say to him. Just as the legal battles seemed to be winding down, a new challenge presented itself. I was offered a promotion at work, a significant step up, but it required relocation to a larger city, 2 states away. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave all the bitterness behind, but it also meant uprooting the girls from their friends, their schools, their familiar world. I discussed it with Emily and Grace. They listened, their faces thoughtful. "It'd be hard to leave Sarah and Liz," Emily admitted, her voice soft. "But would be nice to just start over, wouldn't it?" Grace nodded slowly. "No more mom yelling or being sad all the time?" Their desire for a fresh start, for a life free of the lingering shadow of Brenda's actions, outweighed their hesitancy. Seeing their preference for my stable environment, Brenda finally reluctantly agreed to a more amicable settlement regarding the house and custody. The fight had gone out of her. She recognized the inevitable. A sense of weary closure settled over me as the legal battles finally drew to an end. The financial costs had been immense, the emotional toll even greater. But it was over. I made arrangements to sell my business to Mr. Thompson, my loyal boss, a man who had seen me through the darkest days. It was time for a new chapter. The final court order arrived in the mail, crisp and official. It officially dissolved the marriage, formalized primary custody of Emily and Grace to me, and outlined the terms of the house buyout. It was a cold, clinical document, marking the end of one era and the uncertain beginning of another. The moving truck pulled away from the curb, carrying the last remnants of our old life. Emily and Grace stood beside me, watching it go, their faces a mixture of wistfulness and anticipation. Leaving the Midwestern town, their childhood home, was a bittersweet departure. The house now belonged solely to me, but we were moving on. We were leaving the memories, both good and bad, behind. Brenda was left alone in the now smaller house. I'd seen her from a distance, a solitary figure watching us pack. The once vibrant home, stripped of its furniture, its laughter, and its purpose, echoed with the quiet desolation of her life. Her choices, laid bare, had left her with an empty space and a profound sense of loss. In our new city, Emily and Grace slowly adjusted. The initial shyness gave way to new friendships forged in new school hallways. They found stability in our new apartment, in the predictable rhythm of our lives. Their rooms, decorated with their input, became safe havens. Their laughter, once hesitant, grew more frequent and unrestrained. I established my new life with a quiet determination. My promotion brought new responsibilities, but I focused on providing a nurturing environment for my daughters. Our evenings were filled with homework, shared meals, and long talks. Weekends explored new parks, new museums, new horizons. I continued individual therapy with Dr. Evans, processing the lingering trauma, learning to disentangle myself from the years of anger and resentment. It wasn't a quick fix, but a slow, steady journey toward acceptance and forgiveness, not necessarily for Brenda, but for myself. Brenda, I heard through occasional formal reports from her lawyer, had taken a low-wage job at a discount store. A stark contrast to her previous lifestyle of leisurely lunches and shopping sprees, it was a testament to the unforgiving nature of consequences. The girls maintained occasional supervised contact with Brenda, mostly via video calls. The relationship was strained, formal, devoid of the warmth of mother-daughter affection. The betrayal, the years of strife, had created a chasm too wide to easily bridge. I grappled with the long-term emotional scars, not just on myself, but on Emily and Grace. The permanent shift in our family dynamic, the loss of that idealized, unbroken unit, would always be a part of our story. It was a heavy weight, a constant reminder of the price paid. But in the new landscape, I found solace in simple pleasures. I discovered a small, quiet lake where I could fish on Saturday mornings. The rhythmic cast of the line balm to my soul. I bought a small workbench and found satisfaction in working with my hands, building and repairing, creating something tangible out of fragments. Quiet evenings, a book in hand, the soft sounds of my daughters' voices from their rooms became my sanctuary. Emily, now an independent young woman, started making plans for college. She talked about leaving the state, about pursuing a dream far from the shadows of our past. One evening, she looked at me across the dinner table, her eyes clear and full of maturity. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice soft but firm. "For everything. For your sacrifices." Her gratitude was a quiet validation, a healing touch. Grace, growing into her own, showed a quiet strength, a resilience forged in the upheaval. She was observant, compassionate, a testament to her inherent goodness and the lessons learned from our journey. She understood the fragility of trust, the importance of honesty. I often reflected on the entire ordeal. The revenge, meticulously executed, was complete. The price paid had been immense emotionally and financially for everyone involved. But amidst the wreckage, a fragile hope for a new kind of happiness had emerged. The story ends with Dale and his daughters finding a new rhythm, not a perfect one, but one built on honesty, resilience, and the enduring strength of a father's love. Brenda is last seen living a solitary life, the consequences of her choices a constant, unyielding shadow, a quiet echo in the empty rooms of her house. The crooked river of their lives has found a new, straighter course, a path forward, but the bends and turns, the difficult rapids, are etched into their memories, a permanent reminder of where they came from and the journey they survived.